a guest speaker, and he got sick. He really, really thought he let the spooky Brotherhood down. I mean, he thought that, oh, I can never face them again. After the reunion in San Antonio, I told everybody I'm going by and I'm going to see this brother. And I went by, Cheryl and I, and visited with him and his wife. And I let him know that none of the brothers, none of them, feel bad or hard at you for not showing up because of a medical problem. At that particular time, he told me, he said, are you serious? Or he asked me, he said, are you serious? And I said, I'm as serious as I can be. And needless to say, he said, I'm coming next year. And I would like to welcome Brother Ken Carpenter.
Reminded that today was 9/11, 15-year anniversary. Sorry. Was 9/11, 15th anniversary of that, and most of us as Americans saw that and watched it on TV.
Junior, kiss the mic. Get a little closer.
Okay.
There.
All right. Back to what I was talking about. Today was the 11th, and 9/11 was a terrible day in our history. And I'm sure that everybody in this room knows exactly where they were, what they were doing when it happened. And I'm really sad that our country had that happen, but I'm also rejoicing that we haven't had another catastrophe like that since. Believe me, they're trying to get us, and they're not going to make it because we have so many people. We have the firemen, the policemen that were at the trade center that are heroes. They're genuine heroes. I mean, they ran into those buildings to save people. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me here. And Junior's right, because even when I came here for the first breakfast that morning, I sat down and I was with friends, Danny Brees and Sandy picked me up in Texas and brought me here because I'm no longer able to fly. You know, old pilots, they can't fly. They brought me here and took me into breakfast there and everything, and I was kind of nervous about how I'd be received, you know, accepted. And I sat at a table, had breakfast, and eventually a group of 4 guys sat around me and we were talking. And after about a half an hour, we had shared some experiences, and I thought, wow, this is pretty nice. Well, guess what? All 4 were brand new guys just like me. We all came in there with the same feeling that, my God, you know, what's going to happen to me when I go in there? And after then, I started thinking about how they call it the Brotherhood. And when I first heard the Brotherhood thing, I was thinking, oh, geez, how hokey can you get? My God, you know, the Brotherhood, for God's sake. Well, hey, I know what they mean now. And not only that, we have a sisterhood as well.
Amen.
So we have our spooks and our spookettes in here. And you can see that they share equally in the responsibilities and so forth. I'm so glad that I found this outfit, and I'm so glad that you're willing to listen to me. They tell me to start the speech out with something funny if you can. So I remember when we first got to Vietnam, they gave us a medical briefing, and it was unusual venereal disease, you know, and all that sort of thing. But the one that impressed me at the time was they talked about the fellow at first. I thought he was talking about something wrong with the guy's ear because he kept talking about dire ear. But anyway, it turns out that over there they call them the Ho Chi Minhs. But he told us, he said, don't worry about it. Somebody said, well, what happens? He says, don't worry about it. He said, it goes away when you come back to the States. Then another fellow briefed us later on the wind conditions, and that they don't have tornadoes over there. They have something else. They call them something else. And the same with the hurricanes, they call them something else. And so he said, you know, in our country, the weather system is set up with highs and lows. And typically, air moves from the high toward the low. And so if that happens, you say the wind is blowing. Over here, however, the wind blows the other way. It goes from the lows to highs. So in effect, in Vietnam, the wind doesn't blow, it sucks. I had so many people ask me about the pilot wings that I'm wearing on my hat, and that's the reason I wore my hat when I ate tonight. By the way, the first 2 days I had sunglasses on. It's because my eyes look like piss holes in the snow from the drive over. And because I hadn't been drinking, I didn't want anybody to think I was a lush. But anyway, the pilot wings, when you see a pilot with just plain pilot wings with no star and no wreath, that's a pilot. And then if you see one, he's got a pilot wing with a star on the top, he's a senior pilot. However, if you see a pilot with the wings, the star, and the wreath, he's a bullshit artist. It's really called a command pilot. You guys read my introduction in your flyer when you got here, and as it turns out, they sent me a copy of that to my home, and my wife Mary picked it up. She's reading it and everything, and I was sitting in there minding my own damn business in my home chair and everything else. She comes in and she's skinny little giddy with meatball eyes, and she's got me in her sights, and I could tell from the way she was standing there that I was getting ready for something. And she said, "What's this 50 years?" And I said, "What are you talking about, 50 years?" And she said, "Well, I read that program that you sent over there for your introduction that says that we just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary." And she says, "Don't you know it's been 60? I said, "Of course I know it's been 60, darling, but that was written for when I went to the Air Force Academy to make a speech 10 years ago." And you know what? I don't think she believed me. Okay, the DC-3 was the primary aircraft that we flew over there with some slight modifications. And it came out in 1933, the same year I was born. Of course, I was born at a young age, so I didn't remember that. But, anyway, it came out then, and it has flown literally millions and millions of miles, millions and millions of tons of cargo, and millions of people over the whole world for all these years. Well, when the Air Force, a young captain got the idea that maybe they could use this for a gun platform, and so he started working on it and everything. So they ended up with what we ended up with in Vietnam. We had 3 miniguns on the left-hand side. They pointed out the windows ahead of the cargo door. They threw the front part of the cargo door away, left it open. And these little GE miniguns would go, one gun slow fire would be 3,000 rounds a minute. One gun fast fire would be 6,000 rounds a minute. And of course, you got 3 guns, so that's up to 18,000 rounds a minute. Well, a football field has 36,000 square feet in it. That means that every 2 minutes, we could put 1 round in every square foot of a football field. And you can imagine if somebody is of the Viet Cong persuasion and they're above ground, they are in danger. These guns were fired out by my gun sight in my window, and I could actually fire the target. We flew around the target and kept the target in sight. All the time I could have the gun sight right on whatever I was shooting at. And it made a very, very good stable platform. And the 3 guns were like the Ballantine ale rings. And the top ring would be gun number 1. And supposedly at 3,000 feet, if you were firing down, it would be a 35-foot circle. And then the number 2 gun would be the second ring, and then the 3rd gun would be the 3rd ring. we didn't use it on fast fire very often, because I can guarantee you, when you put 3 guns on fast fire, it would kick that airplane aside like you would not believe. And if you had people walking around that back in the back, like gunners and people, it'd throw them around. So if you did put them on fast fire, you'd have to really feed in some rudder pretty quick to hold it straight. Another advantage that this thing had was we had tracers every 3rd round, or every 5th round, I guess it was. And if you were firing the tracer, if you were below 3,500 feet, the tracers would go all the way to the ground. And so if you were firing on something and your gun sight was off a little bit, say your altitude change or something, you could actually train that around and move it around like you was holding a garden hose on something. You know, holding a garden hose on something's pretty darn easy. Once you got the hang of it, you could keep that thing on target for hours. And we could fly around those hamlets and outposts and stuff for hours. We literally could do that. Not only that, when we got through with it, we had a second sortie that would come in behind us. And we could fly off that target, he could fly right on that target and just keep right on going. So it was a very, very excellent application of air power. I mentioned, I guess I mentioned to you that this was my first flight as an aircraft commander of the AC-47, the one that we're talking about over John Levitt. And the reason for that is that we had 20 in-country sorties before you were allowed to go out with a crew as an aircraft commander. And as it turned out, we had somebody go on emergency leave. I had only flown 17 of my missions. And my commander asked me if I'd do it. He knew I'd been an instructor and I'd flown it all over Europe and Africa and everywhere else. So anyway, he asked me if I'd take it, and I said, sure. And our commander was that way. He would ask you to do things. It wasn't an order. He was probably the nicest commander I ever met. Anyway, I said, okay, I'll take it. It was just a couple hours away, so I went out there, and we had the crew briefing on the inside, usually the officers, and you go out and line up on the aircraft. And I will admit that I was a little bit nervous, because when I lined the crew up and everything, they're all standing there in front of me, all 7 of them, and I looked at them and I said, where the hell did the Viet Cong go? And I'm looking for my VNAF officer. Well, he's not Viet Cong, obviously. So the crew thought that was funny as hell. So did he. He said, all right, here, sir. And then I realized that I'd gotten away with it. But anyway, when we ended up, we were boring holes at a little place called Line K. AA Line K meant you were on airborne alert, hoping, or well, not hoping something happened, but it would be very boring. And the pilot and the co-pilot would trade off and fly. This thing didn't have autopilot or anything. And so you just sit up there and bore holes, and the crew would bag out there in the back until you got a call to go on target. So anyway, this particular night, everything was just calm. It was 10 of 69. And all of a sudden, as you're looking around, everything started to lighten up. I mean, all kinds of explosions going on around. It turned out that the Viet Cong had started dead. So we were called to go to protect the biggest army base there called Long Binh, and they had mortar rounds going in. So we went in, and John and I have a different opinion of how all of this happened, but he thinks that he thinks we never fired a shot. But I know we did, and I know that my DFC on the citation says I got credit for 5 mortar sites. So if I got them without guns, I don't know how. But anyway, we also had a difference on what happened when this mission took place, and I'll cover that a little bit more. But it was called to attention last year when he came and spoke in my stead. Anyway, we got hit, right wing, 3-foot hole in the top, 37-inch hole in the bottom, because I measured it, and raggedy metal hanging down in the slipstream. And of course, the aircraft, he remembers it pitching up into the right. I thought that it pitched down into the right. And I thought I pulled the throttles back. But anyway, as it turned out, he may be right, because he says he looked over there, and I was sitting there with my arms at my side and my head down, out cold. Well, it's a good possibility that he and I never talked about it. They shipped him out the next morning. And so he and I never talked about this for 48 years, or whatever it was. And so anyway, the possibility is that I could have been unconscious and not known it. But he said pretty soon I came around and started flying the airplane. Can you believe that? It evidently happened. And I'm inclined to believe the man. And, you know, my wife says I'm unconscious all the time. We also had a situation where we had to decide what we're going to do with this airplane, because it was not going anywhere. It's coming down. As it turned out, the runway at Benoit was straight ahead. Runway heading 270. We're on the heading at 270. And our navigator told us that we were going on 270. And so as we're coming down this, what you might call a long final, the aircraft, we had to hold full left rudder and full left aileron. And in order, just to keep it straight, and it's still coming down. We had the throttles as set as much as we could. We couldn't feather the right one, because if we did, it would have just gone right in. And I looked over there, and there's the Mekong River. We're gonna ditch it there. We're gonna find a field in the no man's land, or we're gonna go for Benoit. So finally, and by the way, it was an added attraction at Benoit. There was a French minefield on this side of the runway where we were gonna cross. It had never been deactivated. And so here's a live French minefield sitting there. And so we got to go across it. So anyway, I decided we could make it. And so anyway, as we're coming down, the only way I could turn left was to push the nose down and increase the airspeed. Of course, every time you do that, now it's a little harder to get there. So we made it down there, hit on the tippy tip end of the overrun. And it hit really hard. And at the time, the right tire blew, and I believe that I blew it out. And the reason, John Levitor remembered that landing, said the nicest one he ever saw. Yeah, damn glad to be down, I'll tell you. Anyway, to make a long story short, I dynamited the left brake and got it finally to start turning around, because when that right tire went down, the aircraft right wing dropped, and of course it's trying to fly over this way. And fortunately we were going slow enough so that when I started slamming the left brake on it didn't turn. We turned off on the first taxiway. That first taxiway was where airplanes normally come up to get on the runway to take off. So we had a pretty short landing there. The other crew, he's here right now. Ron Brooks was a loadmaster on another crew getting ready to take off. So I didn't know whether they had shot our tire out or whether I blew it out. And so yesterday morning when I met him, he told me that he had flown with me, and he was John Leviton's roommate. It turns out that there's 4 other loadmasters that flew with me from Benoit right here. And do I feel a brotherhood toward those guys? You're damn right I do.
Amen.
And the other thing is, he was able to tell me that, no, you did not blow the tire out. And I said, well, how do you know? He says, because you hit sparks the second you touched down. And of course, the tire had to be flat to do that. But anyway, there's a lot of things like that that I found out years later. I found out also that one of the props had a chunk out of the end of it. And of course, that right engine was shaking like crazy. It was also backfiring because there's a hole in the fuel line. So when they say that there was 3,500 holes in there, I kept questioning that. How could there be 3,500 holes in the airplane? And it turned out there were more than 3,500 holes, but that's what the official Air Force count is. And the guys in the back were injured seriously. I mean, we have 2 that never returned. By By the way, there's only 3 of us left. Frank, myself, and a gunner,
Sergeant Bear, yeah.
Sergeant Bear. Sergeant Bear wrote to me from Japan, and I couldn't hardly read it, but there was another letter in there, and the nurse had written it. And she said he wrote it left-handed. Man, you want to talk about someone that's ready to bawl, that hurt. And anyway, Lebato was air-back. Frank called the helicopters that lift off choppers, and he had them come in to the left-hand side of the airplane in case it blew up, and they could blow the flames away from us when we got out of it. As it turned out, before he and I could get out of the airplane, they had air back everybody out of the back, so all the people were getting medical care. The Lebato story was that he was injured, and I know that he had 47 wounds in his body because I saw the scars. The reason I saw the scars was because our family went and visited his family in Connecticut. And he knew that I was worried sick about how he was making out and so forth. And his family took us out in a Boston whaler boat. They went water skiing. And I looked over, and John's sitting on the dock, and he's got a rope going for him into the boat. And he's got his swimming suit on. And the boat takes off, and my family's sitting in the back of the boat, including me. And he hits those skis, and man, away we go. We go around, he kicks off a ski. Then we come around again, he kicked off a second ski. He is skiing barefoot. And you can see all those spots on his legs. They were purple where they'd operated on his. Anyway, he did that to show me that he's all right. And believe me, he was. And John didn't make it that far, so he died of cancer. And he dedicated his Medal of Honor to the Enlisted Heritage Hall up at Gunter Annex to Maxwell. And I went and did the keynote speech for that. It was at the graduation from the NCO Academy. And so there were 400, it looked like a zebra parade or something in there, all these guys. And of course, as a previous enlisted man, it made me kind of nervous to be around all those NCOs, because I never was an NCO. But anyways, we dedicated it, and while I was getting ready to speak, they had some WAFs come out with Class A blues, white gloves, and white hat, and they were carrying his Medal of Honor, and they presented it. And then they walked over, and like they did today, they unveiled what turned out to be a bust, a brass or bronze bust of John Lebato, right there on the stage. And of course, it's going to be at the Enlisted Heritage Museum there at Gunter. And I saw his profile from where I was sitting, and it really got to me because I never got to see him until he came back one time to Benoit after he got healed up and everything. And he came up, he saw me in a maintenance shack, and he came over and he says, "Major," he says, "did you see the flying schedule?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what do you think? Do you think we ought to do it? We're scheduled to fly together again." I said, "Hell yeah, now we have their attention." But he was a wonderful guy, and the Air Force didn't treat him right. He ended up getting put out of the service before he made his staff sergeant because they'd lost his records. And yeah, my God. And so anyway, I got to watch him on TV on the Ed Sullivan show after he got it. And I got to see his medal and everything up there at his house. And so anyway, the story for John Lebato is this. Every base, every American Air Force base has a John Lebato Award for excellence in the classroom. Anybody that's top of their class when they graduate, for the enlisted people, they get a Lebato Award. He went out and presented a lot. In fact, he called them me awards. I also went out and gave a lot of those awards like at Barksdale or something like that or something. And it's always, there's a street on the base named after him and all this sort of thing. Well, after he got cancer, they had him they dedicated an Air Force C-17 to it and had him come for the ceremony. And so they called me up, the manufacturer of the aircraft called me up and asked me if I wanted a copy of the tape. And I said, oh yeah, you bet. So anyway, they sent me the tape, and here it is, Spirit of John Levitt on the door of the aircraft. And then they had a ceremony set up, and John got up to go and make his part of the speech. He couldn't hardly walk, and he couldn't hardly get up the steps. He made a very short speech, and I can't watch it anymore. I won't watch it anymore. But there's a hell of a fine American, hell of a fine hero, and I am so proud that I put him in for the Medal of Honor. And I'm so proud that I was John Levitt's pilot.
Amen.